Welcome back, everyone. It's Miss Wagers here again for another lesson with you. And this is the last lesson on this story, Earthquakes. So remember, this is a nonfiction informational text, and we have been learning all about earthquakes, and I hope you really enjoyed it. So let's go ahead and start with our learning intentions for today. We are learning to use text features so that we can gather more information about domain-specific words in the text. So we're really going to focus on that vocabulary today. Remember, domain-specific words are words that have to do with a specific topic. And in this case, we're talking about words that have to do with earthquakes. So we know we're successful when we can locate the glossary and the index. We need to be able to explain the purpose of the glossary and the index. And then we also need to be able to use the glossary and the index to determine the meaning of those domain-specific words. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with some foundational skills. Today we are focusing on the suffixes IAN, IST, and ISM. And I have a couple of words using some of those suffixes. So for example, we have the word musician, artist, and tourist. And I want to point out the base word for each of these. So remember, the base word is the main part of the word and the suffix is added to the end. So for example, musician, our base word is music, and then we can see that IAN is added to the end of the word. Or artist, I can see that the base word is art, and then IST is added to the end. And then the same thing with tourist, the base word is tour, T-O-U-R, with the suffix IST. So let's learn a little bit more about these suffixes. So again, remember that a suffix is a word part that's added to the end of the base word, and a suffix will change the base word's meaning. So musician no longer just means music, because that suffix IAN means of a place or its people or one skilled in. So in this case, musician would be one skilled in music, right? And then IST means a person who. So for example, artist, a person who does art, or tourist is a person who tours, okay? And then ism, which we haven't seen a word, but we will on the next slide. ISM means the act, condition, or practice of. All right, so let's see what some other words are. So we have like the word electrician. So again, with that base word, we have the base word electric. And then IAN means one skilled in. So one skilled in electric or electricity. So an electrician is someone who deals with electricity. A guitarist, remember ist is a person too. So a guitarist would be a person who plays guitar, right? Or heroism. Here's that one with the suffix of ISM. So our base word is hero. And then we have the suffix ISM added to the end. So the act, condition, or practice of. So like the act of being a hero, or the condition of being a hero, or even the practice of being a hero. Heroism, we're talking about someone who's done something that's, considered heroic. So for your foundational skills practice today, I am going to give you, again, another drag activity where you get to drag the word to the blank. So you have these sentences, and then you need to find the correct word to finish the sentence. For vocabulary, we have the word predict. I bet you know what this means. Right? We have our picture here. We're predicting with our crystal ball. That's to say or estimate that a specific thing will happen in the future, right? And we make predictions all the time, especially in reading. We like to make some predictions about what we think is going to happen, usually in a fiction story. In the text, we can see this word where it happens. It says, but we need to know much more about earthquakes before we can predict weeks or even days in advance when a big one will hit. So be sure that you're remembering predict means to estimate or say when something's going to happen in the future. I also like to think back to the old Disney show, That's So Raven. Maybe you've seen Raven's Home. But That's So Raven was a popular show when I was growing up, and she also could predict the future, right? So let's go ahead and keep reading. So it says, scientists have learned much about earthquakes and their effects. They can measure even the slightest movements along faults, but we need to know much more about earthquakes before we can predict weeks or even days in advance when a big one will hit. So again, remember, predict is to be able to say when a big earthquake will hit in advance. Until then, proper building design can help lessen their effects. We now know that houses in earthquake-prone areas should be built on solid rock and not on sand, for example. In California and Japan, new houses are designed to be earthquake resistant. It's probably a good idea because if we remember from previous reading, we had that map and it showed us that a lot of the major and moderate earthquakes happen in California. So how can builders protect people from the effects of earthquakes? Let's think. What did it just say? They need to be built on a solid foundation, right? Houses and buildings, not on sand. And then it says houses are designed to be earthquake resistant. So there's some technology to make houses or buildings more earthquake resistant. And now I have a fun little activity that we are going to look at here. It's all about these earthquakes. So let's look. So it says a typical living room showing objects that can move or fall during an earthquake. Including a bookcase filled with books, a picture on the wall, a clock on the bookcase, and a television on a stand. So let's see our instructions. So it says people who live in an earthquake zone can help prevent damage to the objects in their homes. There are 4 objects in this room that could be secured, each with 2 icons. One icon shows the object secured during the earthquake. The other shows the object unsecured during an earthquake. Roll over each icon, then click Watch a video that shows what happens to the object during an earthquake. You may also click on the buttons at the bottom of the page to see the effects of a tremor, a minor quake, a major quake, and all the objects in the room. So let's just start with this bookcase. So let's start with it. Oh, the clock. Unsecured. Here we go. Oh, so that fell off. But if we secure it, let's see what happens. Didn't fall. And we'll do the bookcase, I believe. So unsecured, here we go. Oh, that's a bad day. And then if they secure it, much better. Now let's go ahead. There are more that we could do, but let's look at what would happen if there's just a tremor in this living room. So that's a small earthquake. So maybe a few books fall off and the rubber duck fell off the coffee table. Let's see a minor quake, so it's a little bit bigger. Oh, that TV's probably donezo, right? It fell down like that. The books fell off the shelf, and notice that the picture fell off the wall. And a major quake. Oh. Ooh, do you guys see that? The window even broke that time. Or the wall broke, something. Let's watch that last one more time. Yeah, so the whole wall even ended up opening up. So a major quake could cause a lot of damage, right? So making sure that they are building homes and buildings to be earthquake resistant would be super important for people's safety. So here we can see a picture of a building after an earthquake. And look, it's literally crushed this car. Whoa. It also helps to know what to do when an earthquake strikes. If you are indoors, get under a heavy table, desk, or bed. Stay away from windows, mirrors, or high cabinets. If you are in a high building, stay out of the elevators and stairways. If you are outdoors, move away from high buildings, walls, power poles, or any other tall objects. If possible, move to an open area. Above all, remain calm and don't worry. The chances of you being hurt in an earthquake are very, very slight. So again, our stop and think question, what advice does the author have for anyone indoors during an earthquake? Look for that text evidence. Yeah, so it says, if you're indoors, get under a heavy table, desk, or bed. Stay away from windows, mirrors, or high cabinets. If you're in a high building, stay out of the elevators and staircases or stairways. So why do you think this is good advice? Well, remember back to that little remember back to that little activity that we just looked at where it was showing what happens during an earthquake. Notice that things start falling down. So if you're hiding underneath something sturdy like a table or a desk, you're going to protect your head from things that could be falling and falling on top of you. That would be really dangerous, right? That would be good advice. And then we actually have finished the story, and now we're on to the glossary and the index. So we can see the glossary and the index. They have lots of words here, and we're going to talk more about these in just a second. So good readers reread keywords and sentences to better understand words. They also use text features like the glossary and the index to help. So those are our two focuses for today, remember, are the glossary and the index. Now, our first part of our success criteria was to be able to tell what those things are. So let's look at that. The glossary is usually found at the end of an informational text. You generally don't find a glossary or an index in a fiction text. The glossary gives the definition of domain-specific words found in the text. Sometimes the words will be bolded in the text. In this story, they didn't bold words that they are also in the glossary, but sometimes you'll notice that words that can be found in the glossary are in a bold text or print in the text. So, success criteria, what is a glossary? Well, the glossary gives the definition of domain-specific words. And our second success criteria is, where do we find it? We find it at the end of an informational text. And now an index. The index is also found at the end of an informational text, but it comes after the glossary. The index tells on what page domain-specific words are found. You can use the index to find more information about a specific word or topic. So again, those success criteria. What is an index? Well, it tells you where to find what page domain-specific words can be found on. So you can use that to find more information about a topic or a word. And where do we find it? At the end of an informational text after the glossary. So the index is the very last thing, and then the glossary comes right before that. So let's look at these text features. So for example, we have the word earthquake prone here. So in this sentence, we now know that houses in earthquake-prone areas should be built on solid rock and not on sand, for example. And so we're thinking, man, what does earthquake-prone mean? Well, first I'm going to try and use some context clues. So when it's saying, you know that they should be, if they're in an earthquake-prone area, they should be built on solid rock and not sand. So I'm looking for those context clues, and it tells me that they shouldn't be built on, so I know earthquake-prone areas must be where earthquakes happen a lot. If those houses should be, we really have to be sure that they're built on this solid ground. So that kind of helps me understand that a little bit. But let's look at the word faults. It says they can measure even the slightest movements along faults. But we need to know much more about earthquakes before we can predict days or even weeks in advance when a big one will hit. So again, I'm looking for those context clues, but this time I'm not finding any clues to help me know what a fault is. Now remember, they've talked about this in the text before, but say I've forgotten, I don't know what a fault is, that's when I can check the glossary to find out the meaning of the word faults. So I can look, let's look in the glossary here. I'm looking and it's organized alphabetically. So words starting at the beginning of the alphabet come first, to the end of the alphabet last. So B, E, fault, right here. A crack in the Earth's crust separating rocks that have moved in different directions. Oh, okay, so a fault is a crack in the Earth's crust. Got it, okay. So that helps me to understand what a fault is. And you notice that all the words here in the glossary, like boundary, energy, focus, friction, magnitude, tremor, these are all words that very specifically have to do with earthquakes. All right? They're not just going to give you the definition of another random word. These very specifically have to do with the topic. They're domain specific. So, but what if I wanted to learn more about faults? So it gave me the definition here. I'm like, okay, that's a crack in the Earth's crust, but maybe I want a little bit more explanation. That's when I can check the index. So the purpose of the index, I can find more information about these faults. So I'm going to look in the index and I'm going to look for the word faults. And again, the index is also organized alphabetically. So A comes first, and I'm following the alphabet, B, C, D, E, F, until I find faults. So faults comes right here, And I can see that I can find more information about faults on page 8, 9, 14, 15, 17, and 30. So on all of those pages, the word fault is mentioned. So if I wanted to learn more about faults, I could start checking those pages. But what does the bold type mean in the text? So notice that for faults, the page number 15, that's bolded. Like, see how it's the numbers are a little bit fatter? So it tells me right here, bold type indicates illustrations. That means that there's a picture or an illustration on that page. Now this is unique to this index. Bold type in the index isn't always going to mean a picture. You have to kind of pay attention. But in this case, I know, oh, I can see a picture of faults on page 15. So I can look at that. Here's page 15. And then this was our fault line where it's following these ridges right here that we had looked at before. All right, and we are back to our reading response, and we want to think about those learning intentions. So let's actually flip back to those real quick. All right, let's review our learning intentions. Let's make sure we've got them. So we were learning to use text features so we can gather more information about domain-specific words in the text. All right, so we did gather some more information about those words, especially like the word fault. We got the definition, and we found all those pages and a picture of them. So locate the glossary and index in the text. So we learned that those are found at the end of the text. The glossary comes first and then the index comes after it, but both are at the very end of an informational text, remember. You generally don't find these in a fiction text. And then what's the purpose of a glossary and an index? Well, remember the purpose of a glossary, it's telling you the definition of a domain-specific word, and the index is telling you where in the text you can find more information about some of those words. And then lastly, we did use the glossary and the index to determine the meaning of domain-specific words, like the word fault. All right, so let's get going into that reading response now, shall we? Okay, for your reading response today, you have a couple of questions. First off, number 1, you need to use the glossary to tell me what is the meaning of the word energy based on the glossary. Don't give me your own definition of energy. I want you to give me the definition from the glossary. And then the same thing with the word tremor. I want you to use the glossary to give me the definition. So you can just look at the glossary and copy that definition exactly as it says it in the text. You don't have to put it in your own words this time, guys. Just tell me exactly what it says in the glossary. And then I want you to use the index to answer these questions. So on what page can you find more information about tremors? So again, look at that index and tell me what page or pages you can find more information about tremors. And then on what page can you find more information about plates? So again, I just need page numbers for these. This time, it's really easy that you don't even need a complete sentence. I will take, if you just give me the numbers. If you want to put it in a complete sentence, extra bonus, because that's always really good to practice. Don't forget your capital letter and period at the end. All right, guys, that is all for today. I hope you have a fantastic day. Be kind to one another. Make sure you finish all of your assignments, and I'll see y'all later. Adios.